You've heard it said that a mother's place is close to her children. But what happens when that place becomes a basement? When companionship turns into obligation? When affection becomes a checklist of chores? Many women, like me, believe that aging means giving up everything, even your own name. But what no one tells us is that behind the good intentions of taking care of mom, there often hides a subtler kind of abandonment, and a far crueler one. After 70, the fatal mistake many make is thinking they must depend on their children to keep living. But what if I told you this could steal your freedom, your identity, and even your joy for life? I believed it, and I paid the price. But I also rediscovered something I thought I'd lost forever: myself. This is my story, and if you've been through it, thought about it, or fear it might happen to you, stay with me till the end. You might find a piece of your own truth hidden in my words. I never thought a house so full of memories could become so silent. After Edward's funeral, the rocking chair in the living room seemed to stare at me, empty, as if waiting for someone who would never return. In Detroit, even the wind felt different. I was sitting on the couch, a lukewarm cup of tea in my hands, when the phone rang. It was Laura, my daughter. "Mom, you can't stay alone. Come to Chicago." Her voice was full of love and insistence, as if the decision had already been made. That week, the neighbors came one by one to hug me. Mrs. Letitia from upstairs cried as if Edward were her own brother. The priest blessed us at the seventh-day Mass and, before leaving, said, "Going to your daughter's house is for the best. You need care, Mrs. Geralda." The doctor talked about loneliness and falls, and Michael, my oldest son, added, "Laura is better equipped." Equipped? As if my own heart weren't enough for me. The night before leaving, I looked at Edward's guitar for the last time. He loved playing Caminhemos. He said it was our song. With trembling fingers, I handed the guitar to the neighbor's grandson, a boy with small hands and hopeful eyes. He promised to take good care of it, and I promised myself I wouldn't look back. The suitcase was already packed, and the emptiness in the living room was bigger than what could fit inside it. Yet everyone applauded my decision, as if it were the grand finale of a show. On the way to the airport, I tried to picture my new life. Laura was so organized, so modern. She talked about low-carb diets, mindfulness, things we never learned as kids. I wondered, is there still a place for me in her world? A 73-year-old widow with aching knees and a heart still full of memories? Would there be room for my habits, my stories, my silences? When the car stopped in front of Laura's house, my heart raced. Everything was so pretty, so modern, with artificial flowers on the porch and those signs that say, "Home Sweet Home," but never tell the whole story. Robert, my son-in-law, popped the trunk and said casually, "Don't worry, I'll take the suitcase down to the basement." I smiled, not quite understanding. Basement? The so-called room was really an office, the kind where you whisper to avoid interrupting meetings. It smelled of mildew with a rug that creaked underfoot.
Laura, excited, pulled open the short curtain and said, "It's private, Mom, and we got a new heater." This wasn't a room, it was a corner, a space between necessity and improvisation. But I thanked her, because I've learned pains don't get answers. You observe them, store them, and wait for the right day to remember who you were.
I'd always had the habit of writing. When the boys were little, I'd jot down their first steps, their tiny teeth, their crooked drawings with love-stained dedications. Then came Edward's notes, grocery lists, daily Bible verses. Now my notebook had become a silent confidant. In it, I began recording what no longer fit inside my chest. Day 7, changed 3 light bulbs, washed the dog, forgot Robert's gluten-free bread. Laura's face fell. It's strange to realize aging is like becoming invisible again. I was present in every corner of that house, but my name seemed to vanish from their lips. On the 15th, Liam called me Grandma in front of his teacher. Everyone laughed as if it were a cute mistake. I smiled on the outside, but in the bathroom, I sat on the closed toilet lid and cried silently. It wasn't about the name. It was about the place I no longer held. The entries piled up, each page a ledger of emotions. I was no longer the strong mother, nor Edward's wife. Now I was just the help, with duties and expectations no one voiced, but that echoed in their glances and silences. Some days, I caught myself cleaning windows twice just to justify my presence, because being old in that house meant not being a burden, and for that, I had to earn my keep with labor. One day, folding Emma's clothes, I spotted an old shirt of mine at the bottom of the drawer, still carrying the Detroit fabric softener scent. I hugged it like a memory and wrote in the notebook, "Today I missed myself." It hit me hard, because it's cruel when you have to rediscover yourself in hiding between chores, lists, and favors, as if being useful were the only way not to be discarded. I went to the grocery store that morning with a list folded in my apron pocket. Laura had asked me to buy ingredients for Robert's business dinner. Fresh salmon, asparagus, brie cheese, things I'd never learned to pick but that she'd insisted on. "Mom, you need to adapt to the times." There, between cold aisles and hurried voices, a store clerk stopped me. "Are you the nanny for Laura's kids?" I froze for seconds. The world seemed to shrink around me. I shook my head with a weak smile. "No, I'm her mother." The girl gave an embarrassed chuckle. "Oh, sorry. It's just you're wearing the uniform." Uniform. She meant the floral apron, with its large pockets and sauce stains. I was a 73-year-old widow with children and grandchildren, yet I'd been mistaken for the nanny. That night, I sat at the table as usual, listening more than speaking. Robert came home from work, shrugged off his blazer, glanced at me, and said, "Good evening, Mrs. Giralda." Not rude, just distant. He'd never called me mother-in-law or even Giralda, only Mrs., like you'd greet the cleaning lady or the building concierge. I felt my name slipping through the cracks of that house like a fallen picture frame no one bothered to rehang. After everyone went upstairs, I returned to the basement and studied myself in the small mirror glued to the closet door. I touched my face. "Are you still in there?" I whispered. Not vanity, identity. The old Giralda laughed loudly, sang with Edward on Sundays, cheered at Michael's games.
Now I was just the efficient, silent, available woman. The name I was born with seemed erased, and no one in that house had noticed. It was an ordinary morning, the kind that begins with sunlight drifting lazily through the basement window. I was in the bathroom, tugging a damp towel from the rack, when the slippery floor betrayed me. The world spun, then I fell. I cried out, my voice frail, but the house was full of noise. The blaring TV, echoes of last night's dinner laughter still in my ears. No one heard. I lay there, pain seeping into my bones, fighting tears. The next day, when Laura finally noticed, she spoke in that soft tone reserved for minor ailments. "Mom, you need more calcium," as if my pain had been reduced to a medical footnote, a triviality in her routine. I wanted to scream that it wasn't just that the cold floor had been a blow to my dignity, but my words stayed trapped in silence. In the days that followed, the weight of the fall grew, not just in my body, but in my spirit. No one saw the fear that shadowed every step. What if I fall again? What if no one's there? What if my daughter's house is a prison disguised as a home? At night, I'd count the bruises on my skin, but mostly the invisible ones, the abandonment masquerading as careless care. Yet, like every woman who's carried a lifetime on her back, I refuse to let that fall define me. Because despite the fatal mistakes so many elders make, surrendering without question, I still had the strength to cling to my identity, to rise. I just didn't know how yet. For now, I stayed there, listening to the house, waiting for an answer that never came.
On that gray day, when the silence felt heavier than the entire house, the phone rang. It was Carmen, a lifelong friend from my days working at the Hispanic Center. Her voice brimmed with urgency and hope. "Geralda, we need you. Miguel wants to read to his son who's battling cancer." My heart, dormant for so long, flared to life in a burst of light. Across the room, Laura frowned at the conversation. "Mom, those immigrants have so many illnesses. You need to prioritize your health." Her words landed like a bucket of ice water, but they couldn't extinguish the flame Carmen had lit in me. I knew this was my freedom disguised as a mission, my chance to escape that stifling room and rediscover who I truly was. That afternoon, I grabbed my old coat and tucked my diary of lists into my bag. I walked out with steady steps, despite my protesting me. At the Hispanic Center, the smell of coffee and old paper welcomed me like an embrace. Miguel, the boy, smiled when he saw me, and in that instant, the prison of household chores vanished. I was useful again, heard again, the owner of my time again. Slowly, that call became routine. I read to children, swapped stories with mothers, and belonged to a community that said my name with warmth and respect. It was a reunion with my identity, a silent rebuttal to years of emotional abuse masked as love in that house. And I knew this small revolution was just the beginning. That week, Laura was especially tense about her boss's dinner visit. In the morning, she checked her watch impatiently. "Mom, I need you to wash the curtains before dinner. They're dusty." I took a deep breath, weary of the endless routine. "Laura, I have class at the Hispanic Center today, remember? You can wash the curtains." She stared at me as if I asked to climb Everest. When the time came, no one mentioned the curtains. Robert, who usually drove me, forgot to pick me up. I had to call an Uber, and anger burned in my chest. There I was, a 73-year-old woman walking along through the city, feeling the weight of being invisible even in my own home. That quiet revolt was the final spark I needed to realize I couldn't keep living this way.
Back home, I collapsed on the basement couch, staring at the dusty window. The curtains remained dirty, as forgotten as I was in that forgotten space. I thought of all I'd lost: freedom, identity, respect. But despite it all, an inner fire began to grow. That day, the dusty curtains weren't just a chore, they were a symbol of my refusal to fade away. I knew something had to change, and that anger, tucked between the folds of the curtains, began to fuel me. Because sometimes it's in silent rebellion that the soul finds its truest cry, and I was about to discover just how far that cry could take me. It was an ordinary day, the kind where routine repeats without mercy. As I sorted laundry, I felt something odd in my apron pocket, a tiny, crumpled note. I unfolded it carefully, and the words shattered me. "Grandma, Mommy says you're a burden. What's burden?" That simple question, written in Emma's delicate handwriting, echoed inside me like silent thunder. I sat on the cold laundry room floor, clutching the note, trying to pinpoint when the fall began. How could someone who'd carried so much, loved so deeply, be called a burden? The house's silence screamed the unspoken truth, the emotional abuse disguised as love that had been eroding my soul. I, who once was the family's pillar, was now just an object to be carried when convenient. When Emma asked me the meaning of that word, my heart wanted to scream. Instead, I hugged her tight and whispered that she was light, that she shouldn't believe hurtful words. But her doubt lingered, and with it my bitter certainty. I urgently needed to reclaim my place, my identity, beyond this house that no longer recognized me. That night, I wrote in my diary. Today, a note reminded me that not all love is care, that the weight I feel is emotional, not physical. I must break this chain before I'm forgotten for good. And so, once again, I began planning my reunion with myself, with the Geralda life kept trying to erase.
On a sleepless night, I grabbed the phone with trembling hands and called Michael. My voice came out steadier than I expected. "I need an apartment, tomorrow." It took him a moment to understand, perhaps because he'd always seen me as the mother who adjusts, adapts, never complains. But that night, I was no longer her. I was Geralda, feeling the weight of abandonment and the urgency of a fresh start. The next day, amid suitcases and paperwork, I decided to burn the chore list in the microwave. A silent, almost symbolic act, but to me, it was like breaking invisible chains. The paper that once bound me to endless duties turned to smoke, and for the first time in months, I felt a strange, sweet relief. That list didn't define me. I still had a name, still had stories. As the flames consumed the last page, my eyes filled with tears, not of sadness, but liberation. I thought of the house in Detroit, the empty rocking chair, slow mornings, and the stories I still wanted to tell. There, I could be myself. No masks, no lists, no chains. Detroit's call wasn't just an invitation to return, it was a summons to rebirth. I packed slowly this time, without looking back. Leaving my children's house wasn't failure, it was courage. After all, the fatal mistake many elders make is surrendering their identity for a love that doesn't care. I chose to care for myself, and this was only the beginning of my story. When I announced my departure, Laura burst into tears. "What about the kids? My trips? How will we manage without you?" Her voice trembled with fear and sadness, but I knew this was no longer my place. I took a deep breath and replied with the calm of someone who's lived too long pleasing others. "Hire a nanny. I've already been a mother." She stood frozen, face marked by surprise and a hint of resentment. That moment, if preserved, would become a lifelong memory of the distraught daughter and the resolute mother. I was no longer silent support or a piece of furniture. I was a woman who demanded respect. As I packed, the house's heavy silence grew louder. Every folded item was a goodbye. Every zipper closed, a step toward freedom. This wasn't escape, my dear. It was the courage to write a new chapter, a chapter I choose from myself. I left before dawn, leaving only a short note. I love you, but I love who I was before more. The cold dawn was my brave silence, the start of my return to myself, and I knew nothing would ever be the same. I woke before 5, no alarm needed. My body knew. Departure day. The house still slept, wrapped in a silence that no longer welcomed me. I folded the last blouse, tucked my diary into my bag, and set aside the teacup I'd leave in the basement like returning borrowed goods. One last look around. No anger, just relief. I wanted no goodbyes. I'd whispered 1,000 silent farewells these past months when called a burden, when Robert treated me like a stranger, when the fridge list defined my existence. The kitchen table held my note, just a few lines. I love you, but I love who I was before more. Not revenge, liberation. I stepped out lightly, like walking out of a bad dream. The dark sky seemed complicit in my courage. The taxi driver to the station was quiet, the kind who understands some journeys begin before boarding. Through the window, for the first time in years, I felt my heart beat to my rhythm. The suitcase beside me felt lighter than when I'd arrived, because now it carried no omission, no erasure, no fear of hurting others. For the first time since burying Edward, I felt alive, and more importantly, author of my own story. And in Detroit, the rocking chair waited beneath a different sun. My Detroit apartment still smelled of fresh paint and old wood, small but mine. My paintings, my quilts, my silences. That morning, I brewed coffee my way, my grounds, in the blue cup I'd smuggled from Laura's. I sat at the table in pajamas, hair unkempt, no rush to please anyone. When I spilled coffee on my lap, I laughed, deeply, like someone saying, "Now this is living." A solitary cup, but it tasted like freedom. No one to complain about gluten, calories, or strong smells. Just me, my thoughts, and the old radio playing Edward's favorite song. For a moment, I swore I heard him humming, like on Sunday mornings. Grief remained, yes, but now shared with the lightness of self-discovery. At the window, I let sunlight warm my face. Neighbors passed by, the mailman smiled, a woman walked a stubborn dog. Ordinary life, but mine. And for the first time in years, no one expected me to be more than what I am. An old woman, whole, with stories in her hands and fire in her soul. Later, I shelved books, adjusted the rocking chair, and wrote in my diary. Today was the first real day after so many in limbo. Even alone, I felt accompanied by myself. Geralda is back. And deep down, I knew this was just the beginning. In the armchair by the window, notebook on my lap, heart light yet full, I wrote slowly, like whispering to my soul. Daughter, one day you'll understand. May your children treat you better. No bitterness, just the firmness of someone no longer begging to be heard. Not a reproach, a mirror. I wrote of silence, of the small abuses hidden behind sweet phrases, of how aging needs freedom,
not gilded cages. I named the pain, the endurance, and what I no longer could bear. I signed not with spite, with truth. The letter stayed folded in my diary, never sent. Some words need only be spoken to stop wounding us. That afternoon, Miguel arrived, book under his arm, tired smile. We sat together, reading the day's word, freedom. I taught him the pronunciation, slowly. His eyes sparkled as if learning a spell. And it was. Freedom is a word you feel before understanding. As he repeated, freedom, sunlight danced through the sheer curtains I'd hung myself. I looked around, breathed deeply, and silently gave thanks. Because in the end, I didn't leave for lack of love. I left because I love myself, too. And no one, not even a child, should make us forget that. If you've made it this far, perhaps you feel that knot in your chest, and for good reason. The truth is, so many of us are taught to accept less as we age, for peace, family, love. But is it love when we shrink to fit, when we become help instead of human? Geralda's story is just one of many, but it asks a question every woman must face. Who am I beyond roles I've been given? Are you forgetting yourself to be remembered by others? Is the care you give slowly destroying you? Comment below. I still remember who I was. If this story moved you, share it with another woman who needs to hear it. And don't forget to subscribe and hit the bell. We've got more stories to tell. Maybe the next one is yours.